Hulk editing back to the 80s. When Bruce Banner, the man behind the Hulk, finds himself testing a new piece of experimental technology in Tony Stark's lab, things quickly go awry. Stark's time manipulation device, meant to briefly reverse small moments in time, malfunctions, sending Banner and the Hulk hurtling back into the 1980s. But the Hulk's anger isn't the only thing wreaking havoc. The 80s version of the Hulk is now editing the timeline, reshaping the decade in unexpected and chaotic ways. Bruce Banner stood cautiously in Tony Stark's lab, eyeing the sleek time manipulation device that glowed a soft blue on the table. Stark had proudly introduced it as the Rewinder, a gadget capable of briefly rewinding time for a few seconds, a useful tool for undoing minor mistakes. Well, ready to give it a go? Stark grinned. Banner hesitated but eventually nodded. Just a quick test. As Bruce held the Rewinder, something in the device's core sparked. A pulse of energy shot out, sending a surge of green through Bruce's body. Before he could react, the transformation began. His muscles bulged, skin turned emerald, and soon, the Hulk stood towering over the lab equipment. But something was different. The world around Hulk started to warp and blur, like an old VHS tape being rewound at high speed. The next thing Hulk knew, the walls of Stark's high-tech lab were gone. Instead, he stood in the middle of a city filled with neon lights, booming arcades, and synthesizer music blaring from cassette players. The year was 1985. Lost in the 80s, confused and disoriented, Hulk stomped through the city streets. He wasn't sure where or when he was. The people around him stared in awe at his size and appearance, but the 80s were a time of big hair, loud fashion, and crazy trends, so they weren't too shocked. "Hulk smash," he grumbled, looking at the neon signs and roller skating teenagers. As he wandered, Hulk stumbled upon an old movie set. The bright lights, retro cameras, and film crew sparked something in his mind. He wasn't just lost in time, he was rewriting it. Every time Hulk's immense power was unleashed, the timeline seemed to change. He was editing history, like a clumsy editor cutting and pasting scenes into the wrong places. Suddenly, movies from the 80s became real life. Iconic characters from that era, like Marty McFly, RoboCop, and even the Ghostbusters, started appearing out of nowhere. The Hulk's time-altering presence had jumbled everything up. Hulk versus 80s icons. Chaos ensued as Hulk unintentionally faced off against 80s heroes. Marty McFly raced by on his hoverboard, confused as to why a giant green monster was chasing him down a street lit by DeLoreans. RoboCop, seeing Hulk as a threat, attempted to subdue him with his high-tech for-the-time weaponry. "Hulk not want fight. Hulk want help," Hulk growled, but his rage boiled over. The more frustrated he became, the more the timeline distorted. In the midst of all this madness, the soundtrack of the 80s blared. Synth-heavy music filled the air as scenes from iconic movies blended together. Hulk found himself running through a ghost-infested New York, smashing Stay-Puffed Marshmallow Men, only to suddenly be teleported into a boxing ring where Rocky Balboa was training. "Hulk strong. Hulk not fight small man," Hulk declared, but Rocky, true to his spirit, stood his ground. A blast from Bruce's past. Amid the chaos, Bruce Banner's consciousness began to resurface within the Hulk. He started to remember bits and pieces of his childhood, when he'd watched these very movies on his old VCR. The 80s were a part of him too. The vivid memories of mixtapes, Atari games, and cassette players flooded his mind, softening Hulk's rage. Realizing what was happening, Banner fought to regain control. He had to stop the timeline from unraveling completely. If Hulk continued to edit the 80s, it could permanently alter history, leaving the present unrecognizable. Fixing the timeline. Using the Rewinder, which was still partially functioning, Banner, now in control of the Hulk, tried to reverse the damage. He began piecing the 80s timeline back together, undoing the wild changes his presence had caused. Slowly, the Ghostbusters returned to their films, Rocky went back to the ring, and Marty McFly vanished in a flash of light, heading back to his rightful place in Hill Valley. But there was one problem left. The Rewinder had been damaged beyond repair. Banner needed one more surge of energy to fully restore the timeline, but it would take all of Hulk's strength to power it up. "Hulk, we have to do this together," Bruce pleaded from within. With a mighty roar, Hulk slammed his fists together, creating a thunderous shockwave that rippled through the air. The rewinder sparked to life, sending a wave of blue energy across the city, slowly stitching the 80s back together, back to the present. The next thing Bruce knew, he was back in Stark's lab. The rewinder lay in pieces on the floor, and Tony Stark was standing over him, grinning. "Well, that was one heck of a ride, wasn't it?" Bruce groaned, sitting up. "You have no idea. The 80s may have been saved." But Bruce couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic for the neon lights, cassette tapes, and the simpler days of his youth. For a brief moment, he and the Hulk had experienced something no one else ever could. A journey through time, editing history, and seeing the wild spirit of the 80s firsthand. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Widescope for more diverse content. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. Also, please suggest ways I can create better quality videos so that I can provide you with even better content in the future.